Hello everybody, in this video we are going to graph quadratic functions and identify key features on those graphs. So there's a couple things that I want to go over before we actually start graphing them, which are some of the vocabulary that we're going to be using to identify those key features on this graph. So the very first thing I want to point out is when we graph a quadratic function, the graph is actually called a parabola, which is a U-shaped graph. So we're going to go ahead and write that into our notes that we are now looking at and dealing with parabolas. So if you hear the word parabola, it just refers to the graph of a quadratic function. Now your parabola, because it's a U-shaped graph, can either open up or down. So we're going to say it opens upward or downward. Okay. And so with that comes several vocabulary words that go with our parabola. So if you look right here on the next section, I'm just going to underline or highlight some of these words just so you know where to look on the graph to find them, but then I'll show you how to identify those key pieces and how to write them out once we have our graph. So the vertex is going to be our first word. It is a point with an x and a y value in the middle of your parabola. And so your vertex is either going to be the highest or the lowest point of your parabola. Okay. We have something called the axis of symmetry. So just like we know, we've heard the word symmetry before. Symmetry is a line that creates equal parts. So for a parabola, a vertical line will divide our parabola into two symmetric parts. So because the vertex is in the middle, our axis of symmetry will actually go right through that vertex. Okay. All right, so when we're dealing with a parabola that either opens up upward or downward, your parabola has one of the two. It's either a minimum or a maximum value, which can be used to be represented through a horizontal line. So you're going to realize that your vertex, since it's the point in the middle, is going to be a very important point to us, that we are going to use that as our point of reference for our axis of symmetry line. Also, we're going to use it for our minimum and maximum line because it is either the highest or the lowest point on the parabola. All right, x-intercepts. So one of the things that I want to point out about x-intercepts is that we can actually refer to the x-intercepts of a graph several different ways. So there are several words that you might hear, but I just need you to know that these words represent x-intercepts. The word zero, root, and solution all mean the same thing. It's where the graph crosses the x-axis. All right, so our domain, one of the things that I want to point out about the domain, we know the domain are the x's in the function. And so if we have an unbounded parabola, which means it has arrows on both ends, then that means that it is always going to be all real numbers because it's going to continue to go up or down to the left and to the right. So that's why it's all real numbers. Our range will not be all real numbers because we will have either a high point or a low point, which is our starting point. And then our graph will either go to positive or negative infinity. So we are going to identify our range, and we're actually going to use our range very closely with our minimum and maximum values. So I know I gave you a lot of information, but just keep in mind that these are the vocabulary words that we're going to use with our graph. So we're doing two things. We are graphing quadratic functions, and then from there, we are identifying all these key pieces for each one of those individual graphs. Okay. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about how we can create points from an equation so we can then graph them on a coordinate plane. All right, since we're going to be graphing standard form quadratic functions, I am going to be using a calculator to do this. We're going to use our calculator to create a table of values so we can then use those as points to create our graphs. So I just want to mention that the calculator that I'm going to be using on this video is a TI Nspire. So if you're also using a TI Nspire, then I'm going to show you how to take your equation, put it in the calculator, how to access the table, and then use that information to find the points that we're going to use to create our U-shaped graph, which is a parabola. Okay. So with that being said, let's take a moment to talk about what a standard form quadratic function is. Okay. So standard form means that your quadratic equation is going to have an a value attached to your x squared. So a always is attached to your x squared, and it's in the front of your equation. Then in the middle, we have another number that's attached to just the x. Notice that this x is not raised to the second power. Your x will always be in the middle. So x squared in the front, and then x squared in the front, and x in the middle. And then we're going to have another number which will be considered our constant. So remember, the constant is the number in the equation with no x's or no variables. And it does need to be in this order for it to be in standard form. Now keep in mind that the x that you plug in here is also the same x here, just that one's being squared and the other one's just being multiplied by a particular number. So if you look at the screen, you're going to see that we have this function, and we have our x squared, we have our x, and we have our constant. Now if you want, you can add the 1 here, but just keep in mind that when you're using your calculator, it's not necessary to put the 1. You can just type it in as x squared plus 4x plus 2. So let's go ahead and grab our calculator and see how we can access the different parts to be able to create this graph. Alright, so here is my calculator. I am going to start on the home screen. I am going to add a new document. So I'm going to hit enter. Now, usually if you have multiple tabs already open, I usually hit this little X to just clear it off. I always start with a clean slate. And so from here, when you go and open up a new document, we are going to add a graph. So I'm going to hit number 2. And once you do that, you have this f of 1. So this is the 1 just tells us how many equations. We can add multiple equations, but for this one, we're just going to do one at a time. So I'm going to type in x squared plus 4x plus 2, but please make sure that you're typing these in correctly, especially if we're going to use our calculator for this. So we're going to hit x squared plus 4x plus 2. And if you add the 1 in there, it's completely fine. It'll give you the same thing. Okay. All right. So once you have this on your screen, you're going to hit enter, because right now your calculator doesn't know that we're going to use this function. So when you hit enter, it does check off the little box, and you should be able to see a U-shaped graph on your screen. Now, it's really hard to be able to find exact points just by looking at the graph. So I do expect you to add exact points on your graph. So let's go to the table of values so you can pull out those exact points. So for this one, you're going to hit control. So control is going to be this one right here, and the letter T. So control T, and your your table pops up. So keep in mind that you need to scroll up to find negative numbers, to access the negative numbers, the zeros, and the positive numbers. Now, if we take a moment to look at the graph that we have, most of the time the graph will only have what you need to create the U-shaped graph. So from here, I'm just going to start with -4. So I'm going to go, since my graph starts at -4, I'm going to start here, and notice that at -4, I can go up to +2. So I'm going to start my first point there. And then we have -3 is a -1. So I'm going to graph all the points that I can on this particular graph. So -2, -2. And then from here, -1, -1. I'm going to go down 0 and +2. Now notice that if I go to the next one, it goes to 1, but it goes all the way up to 7. There's no room for me to go up to 7 here, so this is all I need. So you can stop once you can look at the graph and see that you have a U-shaped graph. So this is going to be my vertex because you can tell that this is the one point in the middle. So I like to circle it because a vertex is really important. And then from here, I'm going to do my best to connect these dots, hit each one of those points on both sides. Like that. Okay. And so right here, I'm actually going to pause this video, and then we're going to go to the next one so we can identify all the key components of this graph. So far, I hope that showing you how to access and use those features on your calculator to create this has helped. So I'll see you in the next video so we can actually identify those key pieces.